Hello everyone, I'm Michaela Kathleen, and in this video I'm going to be talking about books that you shouldn't judge by their movies. I did a similar thing last month, but that video was books that you shouldn't judge by their covers, which I talked about good books with bad covers. And now I'm going to be talking about good books with not necessarily always bad adaptions, but just ones that maybe don't fully translate the experience of reading the book. But the first one I'm going to be talking about is a bad adaptation, and that is Inkheart by Cornelia Funk. I remember being very excited for this movie as a kid. This came kind of after the Narnia adaptations and the Harry Potter adaptations, and so I was expecting a movie like those. And this movie just did not deliver. It was a contributing factor to me not really liking Brendan Fraser as an actor when I was a child, which is probably very unfair to him. I didn't like the Mummy movies. They just weren't my type of movies, but I was annoyed at like how popular they were, and then also the Inkheart adaptation was just terrible. And so yeah, I kind of had a grudge against Brendan Fraser. I don't remember all the details of what was wrong with this adaptation because I only saw it the one time when it first came out when I was a kid, but I do remember being very upset about it. Next, I have the Aragon adaptation, which is famously one of the worst adaptations ever. The real problem here is that they changed things so drastically that they simply could not have made the sequel even if this movie had been successful, because the storylines were changed so dramatically that they could not have followed the second book even. This one does have some saving graces for me. Jeremy Irons is one of the big ones. He plays Brom, and I love him in the role so much. And then also, I actually always really enjoyed Saphira. Adding the feathers was weird, but considering when this was made, Saphira actually looks really good for a CGI dragon. And so even though this was a terrible adaptation that could not have been continued, I've still actually watched it like maybe 5 or 6 times, and I own the DVD, because if you can look past the story that it is terribly adapting, it's still kind of a fun watch. Next, in a very similar vein, but much more recent, I have The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness. I just finished this series recently and then watched the movie, and much like Aragon, I don't know what the people making this movie were thinking, because again, they changed things so dramatically that again, even if the movie had been successful, there's no way they could have kept going with the series. Here, the only saving grace was Tom Holland, especially when he was having thoughts in his head that everyone could hear that were embarrassing. It was very cute and funny, but other than that, this was another terrible adaptation for a wonderful book. And this adaptation lost all of the themes and like deeper meanings within the book. Next, I have Paper Towns by John Green, and I actually really enjoyed this adaptation up until the ending. The movie followed the book pretty closely throughout until the end, which it changed majorly, and it kind of lost the whole point of the book at the end, and also became very anticlimactic. In this book, the main character is searching for his next door neighbor who has kind of run away and left behind clues. And at the end of the book, he finds her in the location which the clues have led to, which is just like this abandoned barn. And for some reason in the movie, they decided to have him go to the abandoned barn with his friends, and she's not there. And it's just incredibly anticlimactic. His friends all leave him behind, he goes to a nearby town, and he sees her there. Makes no sense to me. And then there was also just a lot of explanatory stuff left out at the end. There's this notebook that the girl has that she explains how she's been writing about our main character and herself as though they're like an investigative duo her whole life. And just a lot of like really big explanatory stuff like that that was just entirely cut. There was a lot of metaphor cut out, which obviously it's hard to kind of translate metaphor in a movie, but the metaphor about the cracking hull of the ship and the strings coming undone are pretty big in the book, and they are left out. And then they also added some scenes at the end, which in a way it's kind of nice because they add like him going to prom and dancing and kind of getting out of his comfort zone and having more fun. And you know, it's kind of, this girl has inspired him to go out of his shell, which I guess is kind of nice, but also then it just makes the girl even more of just a character to teach the boy a lesson. Whereas in the book, it just ends with him finding her and realizing that he's been not viewing her as a full person this whole time, which is the actual point of the book, and is also a lot more focused on how he's been wrong to be using her in this way. And so then having him in the movie go on and be a better person because of all the things he's learned from her is kind of just putting her back into that position, I feel. So yeah, this one is fun to watch up until the ending, and then it becomes infuriating. Next, I have another John Green book, and that is The Fault in Our Stars. This one is a really good adaptation. It follows the story closely, it doesn't lose any of the messages or the themes. The acting from Shailene Woodley is chef's kiss beautiful. The acting from the boy I will not name in one scene is very good, the parking lot scene, but the rest of his acting is kind of meh for me. So I really actually have no problems with this adaptation at all, but at the same time, there's just something that it loses. Even though it has like a ton of direct quotes from the book, there's still just this feeling to John Green's writing that I get that the movie just somehow doesn't translate, even though it is such a close adaptation. So you can judge this one by the movie a little bit, but at the same time, there's just something about reading it. Next, I have All the Right Places by Jennifer Niven. This one came out on Netflix a few months back, and I was just very kind of underwhelmed by the movie. I feel like there was stuff left out that made me mad, like in Paper Towns. It didn't make me quite as mad as Paper Towns, but it was definitely a similar feeling as Paper Towns. So yeah, for this one, I just overall enjoyed the book way more. Next, I have a pretty famous one, and that is the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. I am of the personal opinion that the first two movies are perfect adaptations. That might be a controversial opinion. But then from there, we just start to lose so much of the information that I feel like it's almost becomes hard to follow the movies. There's so much information missing. I know my parents certainly had trouble with it. And so while I enjoy these adaptations, again, there's just so much missing by necessity that reading the books is a whole other experience. Next, I have Maximum Ride by James Patterson. I just recently watched this adaptation just for the giggles. I knew it was a terrible, terrible adaptation, and it was certainly fun to watch. It was so bad it was good. And the books aren't like the highest quality literature or whatever, but they certainly don't run in the it's so bad it's good category, I don't think. So yeah, the movies are fun to watch for laugh because they're just so intensely bad. And much like the Aragon movie and the Chaos Walking movie, things are changed in a way that even if it had been a good movie, they couldn't have made a sequel. But that didn't make me so mad with these because I do not have as much of an attachment to these. Next, I have The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak, which I've only seen this movie once when it first came out, so I don't have super clear memories of it, and I don't think it was a terrible adaptation, but I certainly just did not fall in love with it the way that I fell in love with the book. I can't remember what they did about the fact that the narrator in the book is deaf. I don't remember if they just cut that. I'm not sure how easy that would have been to adapt, or if they have him narrating in the movie. Regardless, that's one of my favorite parts about the book, and it's not something that stands out in my memory from the movie. With this one, I just feel like a lot of the feeling and the heart that the book has gets a little bit lost in translation from the movie, because as I said, the movie just doesn't stick out in my memory at all, whereas the book definitely does. And finally, I have the Disney Fairy books by Gail Carson Levine. And this one has kind of an asterisk of they didn't really even adapt these books. They just made Disney Fairy movies, and then there are also Disney Fairy books. And if you're aware of them both, you might think that they are the same, but they're not. The movies did not adapt the books, the storylines that are in the books at all. They're like their own separate stories. So to me, this was just kind of a bad marketing, I guess, on Disney's part, in that if you're aware of them both, you probably think that they're connected, but then you go watch the movies and you realize that they're not. Or if you saw the movies first and you heard about the books, you might think that the books are what the movies are based on, and the movies aren't as good as the books, so then you might not read the books. But I'm telling you, if you have seen the movies, go read the books because they're a lot better. So yes, these were 10 books that I don't think you should judge by their movies. Let me know down below if you have any disappointing adaptations that you wish people would know not to judge their books based on. And now onto the quote for today's video, which today I have one from a song by Led Zeppelin. And it goes, "There are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on." Thanks for watching. Remember, words matter.